Welcome to Try This at Home. I'm Cliff Baumgardner.
I'm still Harrison Stewart. That is still true.
And this is the last episode of Try This at Home for Season 1.
We did it!
We did it. We have made it to the end of Season 1. Don't worry, we will be back. We can proudly announce we will be back for Season 2 in January of 2025. We're going to take a little time off around the holidays. But we have some cool announcements to make. That before we move forward, we want to take a pause a little bit and look back on these early days of Mythbusters before we head into the new seasons with a few special bonus episodes.
Just one or two.
May also include a few special guests.
Just one or two.
Yeah.
You know?
That will all kick off next week with our very first official Mythbusters guest on the show, Dr. Heather Joseph Witham.
Yes.
The resident folklorist herself joins
her.
us. We're going to talk about her time on the show and maybe also her time not on the show.
Maybe we'll get into it.
From what we understand, she disappears at a certain point, and we want to know why that is. So we will do some digging, and we're so excited for that episode. So excited to talk to her, and for all of you guys to hear that. That is not the only bonus. We will announce them as we go. We have some very special things coming up. So we think you guys will enjoy as we take a little look back on these early days of Mythbusters.
A little retrospective.
But for today, we are talking about Mythbusters Season 1, Episode 16. Our myths are Buried in Concrete, Daddy Longlegs, and Jet Taxi.
Okay.
This episode was designed to make Harrison uncomfortable.
Personally, yes. They looked into their crystal ball. They were like, about 15 years from now, there's going to be some clown on a podcast, and we want to design a full episode to make him poop his pants. And they did. This is the hardest time I've ever had watching a Mythbusters episode.
I think I'm with you. This episode originally aired on February 25th, 2004, directed as always by Peter Rees. And we kind of dipped into our overall thoughts there. But what did you think of this episode as a whole?
The jet was cool.
Yeah.
I guess. No, I mean, I like some of these myths because they are somewhat practical or answer some kind of playground myth, things that I've definitely heard before and
Were you talking about Jimmy Hoffa on your playground?
Yeah, all the time. What were you talking about? If it was Jimmy Hoffa, and where is he? And of course, Marilyn Manson. Those were the two things that you talked about as children on playgrounds. Don't tell me I'm wrong.
They should do that as an episode. That would have been great.
Cliff, how would you test that?
Call him. You have Marilyn Manson on a lie detector. That's the episode.
Hey, just check them for scars. You know? I like the idea of making Buster trying to put he's not going to bend that way. I don't think.
Oh man. Yeah, I thought that this episode
Buster bust.
What I thought was interesting with this episode is I knew that some of the territory we were going to be in here was probably not some of our favorite stuff or not the most comfy stuff to watch, but I honestly thought this was another step in the show reacting and learning from what they've done, where there were some things in this episode that felt like previous myths we've seen. Yeah. But one, they acknowledged that, and two, I thought they did it better. I thought the construction of each of the myths was much better than it would have been previously, and also, thank God, and we'll get there when we get there, but for the jet taxi myth, they didn't try at the end to blame it on the myth. They actually just say, we couldn't do it. This is our failing. This is not a failing of the myth. So we're the ones who are busted this time.
Technically, it's the insurance company's failing, but it's neither here nor there.
But even in the last couple of weeks, we've had several myths where they get to the end and have very strange, busted for now, or we couldn't fully replicate it, but we think it's busted. That kind of thing.
The trombone one.
I was so glad to see them actually get there and have that conversation about, we couldn't didn't live up to this one, hopefully we'll get to try again. You know, I thought that was, so everything in this to me was, from a storytelling perspective, elevated from territory that we've seen before, and I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah. We're also, I really, really, really didn't expect this to happen in season 1. But they're reacting to themselves.
Yes.
There are things, there are lessons that they have gleaned from myths that they've already done. Some might argue they have learned nothing for at least one of them. But I really like that they're like, you remember when this happened, right? And I was like, oh, wow. That's really quickly.
It's like our first previously on Mythbusters.
Yes.
It was great.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, great for us. Not so great for their neighbors.
Myth 1, Buried in Concrete, also called The Hunt for Hoffa.
Yes.
The question here, pretty famous story, is Jimmy Hoffa buried in Giants Stadium? As you would well expect, I jumped right into a research hole at the beginning of this one. Unfortunately, I don't have anything as satisfying as the Alcatraz episode.
Boo!
I was really hoping that I'd get to the end of this and get to hit you with, and they found him.
Yeah. He was right under Jamie's feet the whole time.
Jimmy Hoffa was, of course, the head of the Teamsters who disappeared in July of 1975. And from what I can find, it appears the case is still open to this day.
Fantastic.
This question is still out there. As recently as October of 2021, the FBI obtained a search warrant and completed a survey of a landfill where a worker had claimed to have buried Hoffa's body in a steel drum 15 feet below the surface.
What?
Which was beneath the Pulaski Skyway in Jersey City. In July of 2020,
Beautiful.
In July of 2022, the FBI announced that nothing of value was discovered from that trip. So, as recently as 2022, the FBI is still out there talking about this. So, remains relevant to this day.
I mean, you can't just be a public figure and disappear off the face of the earth and have that just go away.
The schoolyards of America demand answers.
They do. That and Marilyn Manson. We got to find them out.
The kind of the idea, the part of this myth that Adam and Jamie are going into specifically was the idea that his body was hidden during construction of Giants Stadium because the timelines line up that in the period when he would have disappeared, the stadium was being built, and that was the long-held sort of expectation. What did you think about this sort of question? This is a very different kind of myth than we've seen. It's more in that rocket car territory or balloon guy territory, but it's very different where it's very specific to a real-life story that, I mean, if they were to find his body buried in Giant Stadium, would have been insane. I mean, that would have been monumentous, history making. So we've never seen anything quite like this before. What did you think of that?
So in a vacuum, I would be inclined to say no good because it's so specific that we would have heard about it if they had found something. But I'll tell you, the Alcatraz episode turned me. I mean, they legitimately made a really strong case that seemed to move the investigation forward. So, you know, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. It's also just a fascinating. I did have to look up what Teamsters are. I keep doing it. Like, I know I've looked this up before. The Wikipedia page was purple. I have read it before and still had to be like, now what is that again?
How you know you live in a right to work state.
That's right. Yeah.
You have to look up what the Teamsters are.
That's right. But it's a thoroughly interesting story because it is such a giant question mark.
Yeah.
You know, like there's never been, like, I think one guy made the Giant Stadium claim, and that's the strongest connection that we've ever gotten to the mob. But other than that, we don't have any information. It's like that. Do you know about this this Australian prime minister that just like went missing?
No.
And it's never been solved? It's like that, where it's like,
wow,
I have no idea what's happening. I'm shocked that this far into the 20th century, someone could still just, they're gone.
Yeah.
They're gone.
What I liked about that from a Mythbusters standpoint was I liked that they took that question and they made it testable and scientific based.
Yes.
I feel like that is a big leap for them and is again that evolution that we've been seeing in the show. Because this myth could very quickly become something like one of those flights that went missing years ago, or one of those things that we just don't know, and that there's like supernatural leanings to or whatever, and we just don't know and we don't have an answer. And it would be more of a, History Channel now paranormal documentary kind of thing, and with an open-ended question that you can't get anything satisfying out of.
Right.
And we've seen that on Mythbusters. We've seen those problems, especially in the pilots. Whereas this, I thought it was smart that they said, no, we're going to do the giant stadium part. And then we're going to take that and we're going to break it down into something that we can show you, that you can learn from, that you can actually get some information from. It was, we talked about last week with Michael Kent, talking about the Titanic episode. Some of the problems that Michael had with that and the way that it was tested and kind of how not sciencey it really was in the end for their final test. This to me felt like a much better version where they're testing the specific science that they need in order to prove or disprove this first, so that when you get to that conclusion later on in the myth, you buy it a lot more and you've been with them along that ride. So I thought it's a very weird question for a Mythbusters episode, but I thought they handled that weird question really well.
I agree, because you don't want to come at something like this with any sort of assumptions that like we have greater access to things than the police department, the FBI, who's been on this since God knows when. You know what I mean? Like that I doubt you're going to turn up anything new that way. So it was more a question of plausibility.
Right.
And I thought that was a much smarter approach. And turns out much grosser.
Much grosser. And that gets us into the actual process here, which is essentially that they're going to use ground penetrating radar in Giant Stadium to look and see if they can find any evidence of a body being buried there.
Yeah, you haven't lost me yet, Cliff. Keep going. This is still tracking to me.
Still with me?
Yeah.
Still with me. And I actually thought this, again, going back to how they handled this was really smart. They could have just done that, right? Yes. This could have been a one segment myth, like we saw with the octopus eggs and some of those things in previous episodes, where they could have just bring in a radar, go, nope. But instead, they really built their storytelling into it. And they said, well, first we need to show you what to expect. And we need to show you that this penetrating radar works and how it works, and give you that information that, it's great, like science that they get across.
Right.
So in order to do that, we're going back to the barnyard.
Oh, okay. Why?
Because apparently the only satisfying way to test ground penetrating radar is to bury a couple of dead pigs directly in front of M5.
Oh, what's up? You're on the pig thing again.
We're back to the pigs.
We're back to the pigs.
We're back to the pigs.
We're back. Does your rent, can they up your rent for that? So that might be the only reason for upping rent that I'm like, yeah, the landlord's kind of right.
You know what's hilarious? My note, the second they started jackhammering on the sidewalk, my note was, guess Jamie doesn't rent. That tells me he must own that warehouse.
Terrible neighbors.
Oh my God.
Terrible neighbors.
They just
and they know it too, because they
yeah.
keep showing the people in the window going like, what are they doing? I didn't sign up for this.
They all have your reaction. They're like, pigs again. Oh God.
We just got the smell out. Got the smell. For those of you who haven't listened to every episode, go back and do it, baby. They're all there. They put pigs in a car, dead pigs, of course, and then put the car in a storage container, and just let them turn into... Cliff, what's the famous phrase?
Pig soup.
Yep, that's it. And they did, and apparently it was just awful, right? Like, not only did it take literal months, so it had to have been, from a planning perspective, it had to have been one of the most complicated ones that they did, but it is so funny to me to imagine that they have just gotten past this. They have and also I should note, the myth didn't like the testing didn't really work. Like it had a lot of things that went very, very, very wrong with that one. So it is so funny to me that they have just cleaned this up. They've just removed the smell of death, the taste of death, as a good friend of ours would say. And they're going to do it again.
Yeah.
They're going to do it again.
It's very clear to me that the producers and writers saw all of that footage and thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen and said, we need pigs again.
They're not wrong.
We've got to get pigs back in the show.
Yeah.
And it is hilariously satisfying. This is where we mentioned this earlier. We get our first previously on where they actually go back and show that episode, which was great because it shows exactly what you're saying of like, we've learned no lessons at all.
Yeah. We're doing it again.
You just see them suffering through this myth. And what was interesting was, I don't know if you noticed this, when they bring the dead pigs out to start this myth, the stench is already much worse than I remember it being when they put them in the car.
Apparently.
Because when they put them in the car, it kind of seemed like, I mean, they're dealing with, like, where we live in the South, we've had pig pickings before.
Yes.
I have been with my dad to pick up a dead pig.
Yes.
And it smells like raw meat. It's not the best smell in the world, but it's also not terrible.
Right.
Don't know where they got these little porkies from, because apparently they were already going off before they even go in the ground.
And you can tell because I actually went back and watched some of because I was like, surely, I do not recall, and I feel like I really would have if the pigs were already fully into the decomposition process.
Yeah.
They were not in the car one.
No.
They were absolutely, there's a big part of me that respects, they don't train the camera on the corpses.
Yeah.
They don't make you sit with it.
Yeah.
But there's no real way to avoid once they put it in and start pouring the concrete. Like, you need to see the concrete on them, but you get a good look at those pigs. And brother, they are, at least one of them, and at least in one prominent spot, green. Not in like a forest green as well. Just an absolute like nightmare.
I wonder, I can genuinely see it being a budget thing of them being like, well, we can get already rotting pigs nice
on
and
the cheap.
On the cheap. Oh my God. And the poor cement guy who didn't ask for any of this. You know, he just gets a call to say, hey, we're pouring a sidewalk.
Yeah.
Can you come? And he shows up and there's just a hole with 2 dead rotting pigs in it and a camera crew. What the hell?
And a shirtless Jamie.
And a shirtless jackhammering Jamie.
That's not a joke. That is actually why does he look so natural?
I know.
Like that. Like it's very weird that like a Playgirl centerfold for some reason is just the natural habitat for Jamie Hyneman.
I feel like Jamie's physique, like I look at it and you know, I love watching like superhero movies or whatever,
yes.
right? And you see the incredibly ripped superhero actors and you're like, that's just not real. And I don't even feel like I don't feel any attraction or anything to that because it's not real.
Right.
Jamie is like, I go like, oh, that's what a man's supposed to look like.
Yes.
There's like something primal back in my head that's like, that's what I'm
that's
supposed
a dude.
to be.
That's a hunter-gatherer.
That is
right
a hunter-gatherer. He is protecting the village today.
With his spears, those mammoths don't stand a chance.
My God.
He's going to face one down, solo it.
He is from a different era. Like, that's what Tarzan should look like, you know? Not these live, nimble, hairless guys that they always get in those movies.
He looks a lot like your, like, early talkies tough guys,
yes.
You know, where they're just
yes.
wide and, like, you know, pants jacked up to the nips. And just like, there's just mass there.
Yeah.
It's not well-defined muscle mass that looks like a roided up dude, but he will lift you over his head and chuck you yards.
He could have done the jackhammering without a jackhammer.
He's just punching the ground real hard.
Until
they should have done that. I mean, yes, it was fun to build an army of robots, but you could have just thrown Jamie on the bridge to just punch at it
No
real hard.
joke. Oh my God. We also got
Just like a punching bag, but on the ground.
You mentioned how bad the pigs look when they're in the hole.
Who?
Weirdly enough, one of the worst shots to me that we have seen in the show is actually once the concrete is all in there and the bubbles.
That is exactly where I was going.
What? Oh my! I can't even
because
describe why it's so terrible.
Well, I'm gonna give it a shot.
Sorry, listeners.
There is slight discoloration in those spots. It doesn't look quite the same. There's a very light chartreuse
That's true.
over the bubble, and I don't know if that's just the film of the bubble itself, but like it popped, and Jamie immediately makes a very involuntary face, just a visceral reaction to what just entered his nostrils. It's like, you mean to tell me that this thing is under concrete and they can still smell it perfectly?
Even when the concrete sets.
Oh my God.
That genuinely, like, again, there's no way to talk about this without being very morbid, because we are talking about dead bodies and, murder victims and whatnot. But like that I did find actually fascinating and disturbing of just how difficult that job would really be because of just how bad this process is. Like, that was shocking to me that the concrete is completely dry. The pigs are under like, I don't know how many feet of dirt and concrete, and they can so much that they had to seal it with like, it looked like a I guess it was like a rubber paint based something that they pour on it hot and let it actually seal this part of the sidewalk because it smelled so bad. That was awful.
This is one that I don't really think that it does anything to build the case, but I understand why it's in there.
Yeah.
It's just one of those where
it's the fun and games.
It is the fun and games.
Yeah.
It is the fun and games. It is also just so mean to call. I have a suspicion that it was at least somewhat staged, but to call somebody, like you were saying earlier, to come and do their job.
Yeah.
Surprise! We have pig corpses. Oh, really? Are they fresh? No, not at all, dear boy.
We got them on discount. These are discount pig corpses.
Yeah, we went thrifting for these pigs. And brother, let me tell you, we got a deal. Okay, a big deal.
I did actually really like, as you said, there wasn't the reason they did the pigs and all that was the comedic value. They could have done it differently, but I did really like what it allowed them to do next, which was
that's fair.
Bringing in the ground penetrating radar to show how it actually works, because they actually have a location where they know the pigs to be, so they can do a test and they can visualize it. And they talk a lot about the science of how the radar actually works, which I thought was great. It was another one of those moments we've said all season. Sometimes you want more science because it actually helps you understand the story better and helps you in the end when they go all over Giant Stadium. You feel like, oh, okay, this was exhaustive, right? We've had myths where they might have exhausted all of their options. They might have tested something, 100 times, but what makes it into the show makes you go, oh, did they really run out all their options? Actually seeing this and walking through this way gives you that feeling of like, no, they did. Okay, I'm with them now. And it was great.
So Joseph Witham has a great section where she talks about why this story has penetrated so deeply into the zeitgeist. And it's great. Basically she just says that it's a real hero story. Yeah. It's got a big question mark to it. Like, it just has all the hallmarks that make for a great story. I kept wondering, and I thought for sure she was going to answer. To me, one of the first questions is why Giants Stadium? Like, why is that the spot that they have? Because I do think, I could be wrong. I guess we could check, but I do believe that they have, that there are two things that are true. One, the mob actually did have some of the contracts to build that stadium, so it would make sense. And 2, I want to say they actually have found a body there. I don't think it's Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is one of those instances where there are kernels of truth here that either got misrepresented in a game of telephone or whatever happened, to connect these things. I was really shocked that they didn't go into that at all.
Yeah, I feel
they just accept it. They accept that that's the myth.
Their explanation is just that the stadium was being built in the same time period, and that the mob connections and all that is what led people to believe. And they talk about, I think the other half of that is it being an NFL stadium makes it an iconic story, right? Like that. I mean, one of the, one of the myths was that there was actually a bump on the field, and that bump was Jimmy Hoffa, which is ridiculous.
And that bump was also like messing up gameplay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think that's true.
I think they probably, they probably did have a game where there was a bump in the turf there and they fixed, and it screwed up something and they fixed it later. Right. But even something like that, to think that, because as we said before, if you just take the question, where is Jimmy Hoffa? It's so vague. It's interesting from he disappeared perspective. Right. But then you almost have to have someplace to land it. Yeah. And I think that makes the conspiracy greater, to be like, not only do we know where he is, he's under Giant Stadium. Yes. That makes it kind of Americana in a weird way.
It does. It totally does. It also, so this has to be speculative in nature, but do you think that the Giants franchise played any role in perpetuating that story? Because, and the reason that I bring this up is that when they go to the Giants stadium, they have a former coach there who is like walking them through and and he says that on day 1 of starting as like an assistant coach, that someone told it to him. I can see if the franchise itself isn't propagating it, I can certainly see an argument for they're doing nothing to dispel that myth.
Well, and I kind of feel like this episode was their effort to do that. Hey, we've got these guys who are willing to come in and make a TV show that shows that this isn't the case. Yeah. Because my first thought when they were talking about it, I didn't remember much about this episode, and I didn't remember they actually go to Giant Stadium. And so when we see them in the stadium, I was like, okay, this is endorsed by the Giants. Like, they are actually,
to some degree.
They actually got their involvement. That's surprising to me. But then I thought about, actually, it's good for them to make that point that they don't have a body hidden there. And I'm sure it's kind of like Roswell, New Mexico, where it's to the advantage to keep some mythology alive, right? Even though they've officially disproven it and everything multiple times. Right. So maybe it is still in that same territory. But I mean, I guess now that we're talking about this, like, look how much like good storytelling conversation is coming out of this myth. Like, maybe this is a much even better myth than I thought for a show like this to tackle. And they just found a silly and fun visual structure to do it in, but it's really about this.
See, but that to me, and a big reason why I already know I'm going to miss Joseph Witham is because in this episode, especially, and also in the goldfish episode, she just drops these beautifully succinct 1 to 2 sentence explanation for like, let's take a step back. Here's why. Right. Here's what's happening. Right. Here's how this the most likely explanation for how this penetrated into the larger culture.
And we'll come back to it, but actually her explanation at the very end of this, after the verdict, I thought was the best example of that.
Exactly.
Really getting to that heart of why it's that right brain, left brain, right?
Yes.
Adam and Jamie are doing the technical and the science. This is the mythology and the folklore and the understanding of it. Yeah. And those things haven't always worked on the show. This is a place where it really does. And I feel like I'm with you. I wish that had continued, because we do know that at some point that goes away pretty soon too. But of course, after they've demonstrated the radar, the next thing they have to do is dig up the pics. And I mean, the second that they break the seal, they say the smell comes back.
Well, they said that's a really good point because they left it there for a while.
Yeah.
And
2 months because for some reason that is
because they're insane.
Yeah.
I've got to know what the overlap between the pig myths, like time-wise.
Yeah.
Like, did you attempt this at the same time? Was it like right after? How did we get here?
And I guess it's worth saying the reason they did 2 months, the specific thing to using the pigs was they wanted them to decay completely to see if there can be a cavity left by a decomposing body, which is important because obviously Jimmy Hoffa's body would not still be there. Right. So they're not
It's not encased in carbonite.
Exactly. They're not looking for Han
Yes.
beneath Giant Stadium. They're looking for a cavity that might lead them to find bones or whatever. So the 2 months, I guess, does make sense, but it's still so awful when they crack the seal.
Because they specifically say that the smell had just gone away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, I mean, I almost believe that it hadn't. They just got used to it. But
right. Yeah, their neighbors are like, no, it didn't.
Yeah. You guys are lying on national television.
Every time the wind shifts, we all smell it.
Can't be downwind of the Hyneman house.
And we're still
It's so gross.
Well, the gross part is we're still in the pre-GoPro era. And so they decide they have to stick a camera down in the hole, and Jamie is sticking this thing in the hole while Adam is at the monitor directing like Steven Spielberg on bath salts. And
that's your best description ever. There it is.
And everything you see is it's mostly darkness. Like again, they don't show you too much. It's the horror movie thing.
That's what makes it worse.
We talked about this with the stinky car myth. It's the horror movie technique of you just see enough to make you go, oh no, I don't want more. No, thank you.
They really, I don't know, man. There is something about, for as harsh as I was up top about this episode, there is so much expert storytelling going on.
There really is.
I mean,
yeah, they're flexing on this one.
How much we can dig into all of these and how much they thought out certain aspects of it is just, I mean, it's mind-boggling.
They fill the hole back in with concrete, and am I wrong that they put it right on top of the pigs?
No, they definitely did.
So those, I assume, are still there?
I don't know. I really don't. And I also don't. Oh, no.
I mean, bones last a long time.
I know we just said we were done with the gross, but sure, you can't jackhammer it.
Right.
Because then you're going to hit something. You're going to splurt and...
Oh, God.
This episode needs a warning.
It really does. It seriously does. This is going to be our first explicit content episode of the show.
If decomposition is not your thing, maybe steer clear.
And of course, the whole point
it's our Halloween episode.
There we
go. It worked for them.
And of course, the whole point of all this, as we said, was to eventually go back to Giant Stadium and search all of the places where they were, where the Hoffa was said to be buried with the radar. And unsurprisingly,
because they do show with the pigs that it comes up on radar.
Yeah, and you can see
very clearly.
Because and it was really interesting to see the difference in, it's not, you're not seeing a pig, right? What you're seeing is a difference, and you're seeing the way that the waves respond and all that, and so they can see where there would be a gap. There's something different there. And they go around Giant Stadium and don't see that in any of the places, which not entirely surprising. But again, this is where I really started to think about how in previous episodes this would have been the whole thing, and they were gone womp womp, didn't work.
Yep.
Myth busted.
Yep.
And it would have been like, well, what? Why? Here, I was riveted the whole time they had it, because I didn't remember. I mean, I didn't figure they had found Jimmy Hoffa in this episode, but even so, I was expecting, maybe they found something, or maybe they find a cavity and go, but we can't dig up Giant Stadium.
Right.
What are we gonna know? So I was genuinely interested, and they don't find anything, but it was a great result of all of that storytelling.
It was a great ride.
Yeah, it was a great ride.
Yeah.
This one was busted, and this is where, as we mentioned, Dr. Joseph Witham makes the point that no matter what Adam and Jamie might have found, it won't impact the belief in the myth, which I think is kind of a perfect summation of what we've talked about all season about Mythbusters embraced the idea that the truth can be as satisfying as the conspiracy at times, but at the same time, not that they were in the business of convincing people, but the work that they were doing and the stories that they were playing in were never going to convince. You know, it's the no answer will suffice kind of thing. And I thought she made that point so well here of it doesn't matter what they find. People are still going to believe this because they want to believe it and because it says there's some greater truth to them that it reveals.
In a strange way, she almost telegraphs something that will happen in my mind much later in the show. I don't know when it actually comes up, but like the review episodes, the ones where they go back and they like, I know swaths of people just in my talking to them about like, I'm doing a Mythbusters podcast. I have had some people be like, oh, I hate that show. What?
Yeah.
Why? And they're like, because like they're never actually like proving it in anything. And I mean, quite frankly, it's kind of how I was in the earlier episodes, where like before they really nail down the entertainment aspect of it, I can see how that would be a problem. But this myth in particular is a prime example of why it is so smart to focus on the entertainment, not at the expense of the how they actually conduct the experiments, but in tandem with it, because there are always going to be people that are just going to believe what they believe.
Yep.
It does not matter what you present in front of them. And that being the case, you need to have something in your back pocket to keep people invested. And that's where the great storytelling comes in.
So PJ, specifically, have you ever heard about the fact that Jimmy Hoffa is supposedly buried in concrete?
I've heard that he's buried on the 50-yard line at the Meadowlands. He disappeared so smooth and so clean. I don't think you'll ever find a trace of him. And the fact that everybody feels that he's buried there, he's probably long gone.
Myth 2, jet taxi. Can a jet engine blow a taxi off the road?
Yes.
So this comes from a really interesting story that they said was from Rio de Janeiro, of that there was a road that actually went behind an airport, behind the taxiway.
Not just behind, suspiciously close.
Suspiciously close to the airport. And that they had lights and things to stop people from going when a plane is actually firing up, but that a taxi ran the light when a 737, I believe it was firing up, and actually the jet wash blows the taxi off the road, flips it onto its roof. I think it throws the driver out. They had all these details, but the basic question: can that happen? Is a jet engine powerful enough to actually flip a car?
Yeah.
And I loved that question. As soon as they said that, I was like, I'm in. This is so cool and feels exactly like it is in the myth-busting wheelhouse.
Yes. This is also one that I thought, similar to the Axel one, where I'm like, that has to be true.
Right.
Or no, not the Axel one, the decompression one.
Oh, yeah.
Where I was just like, I have seen this in so many movies over so many years that if there's nothing to this, I'm shocked. Because yes, I absolutely think the second they brought it up, I thought of the scene in Casino Royale.
Yes.
You know, like that was where my mind like immediately went.
And I instantly had a visual of just like, I want to see a taxi get flipped by a big jet engine. That sounds awesome. It was that like that Wile E. Coyote thing again of like, this is going to be awesome.
Yes.
It's a pretty straightforward a myth, except for the problems that they run into. But we get a shopping montage. Those are still hanging around on the show. They go to actually buy a used taxi. And you notice the guy wouldn't let them leave the lot for the test drive?
Yes, because they respond to it.
Yeah, they're literally like, you know that old chestnut of making up a television show, bringing an entire camera crew, and
just to steal a shitty taxi.
And we know at this point that Adam and Jamie are somewhat famous because we have seen people respond to that on the show already. We know the show is on, and people, not this guy, not Taxi Bob or whatever his name was, he was not impressed, and you were not going to leave with that couple $100 worth of taxi.
But at the same time, he was way more okay. Once they finally revealed what they were going to do with it, he was way more okay with it than basically any past buyer.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's just like, as long as the check clears.
Yeah, he's like,
you can do whatever you want.
Okay, that sounds strange, but you boys do you, I guess.
Whatever. Hey, I'm not here to shame.
Hey,
right?
Look, if you're going to blow it off a runway or you're going to turn it into a love shack. Oh, what? It don't matter to me.
Don't matter to me.
It don't matter to me. All right? I don't have to clean those seats anymore. So is this something that happens? Hey, not my business, man. I'm not asking.
I wish
I'm not asking.
I wish he'd been like, now, you boys ain't going to put 2 pigs in that thing, are you? There should have been a pig.
Because word around town is 2 strange boys
are really into pigs.
Are really into putting pigs where they shouldn't be.
I love we've decided he's Southern. I don't think he was.
No, he wasn't at all.
We have made that decision for this character.
You know, it's a good note. It's a good note.
Yes. We got something here too that I think we just talked about this last week with Michael. We're at the point in the show where they decide we're going to make the car remote controlled and don't really spend that much time focusing on it. It's kind of like a beat of like we do,
like one does. Yes,
I did love though. I don't know if you noticed. Jamie's working on making the car remote controlled. The battery dies on the car. They have all these problems. Jamie's like frustrated. He calls the car a piece of crap. I mean, he's just like doing all this hard work and then they cut to Adam doing art projects, making a stencil, just la da da da.
Yeah.
The characters continue, man. I love it so much at the contrast between these two guys.
Again, I cannot overemphasize the importance of editing.
Yes.
Specifically the importance of the comedy that comes through in the editing. Like, they are so good at it. The way they juxtapose them is just perfect.
It's great.
It's prime comedy.
I love it. We also get another great Mythbusters location in this one, which is an airplane graveyard out in the Mojave Desert. It felt straight out of Breaking Bad.
Yes, it did.
this place
I expected Tuco to pull up and to complain about his grandmother and to buy blue meth off of me.
Well, I mean, Jamie kind of has the look.
That's true. And I can definitely see Jamie Hyneman delivering, say my name. You're gosh darn right. It's still on television.
Yeah. This is Discovery. They're not gonna.
They're not gonna drop a GD on Discovery.
But the diagram of how they make the meth would be great. Like the science would be fantastic if Mythbusters made meth. Mythbusters. Oh, Mythbusters. There it is.
Nick, can we call it an episode? Can we just end there? I mean, it's not going to get better. It's not going to go up from that.
We've had bath salts, and now we've had meth.
It's just been a killer episode
all
for
in
Cliff.
One episode. Wow. All right. Yeah, I just need to. Well, it's the end of the season. I'm going out on a high.
I know.
I did have a question. Okay. I don't know if you noticed. This looked to me like the same graveyard and potentially even the same time period as the explosive decompression myth.
Yes.
Because I specifically said in that episode, I noticed how Adam was dressed, where he was in a white shirt, which we don't normally see him in. He was in a white button down, a lot like Jamie's, that was kind of too big and billowing open.
Yes.
Maybe that's just his desert look. I don't know.
Could be.
But he was in that again here.
Could be.
So it really looked like, and I mean, it would make sense. We've got 2 airplane myths that we've got to do.
Right.
We've got a place that has both a runway and a graveyard, so we can buy the old plane, blow it up. We can, from a producing standpoint, it makes tons of sense. But I'd just love to know if they did these at the same time.
I would too, but I keep coming back to the fact that there are parts in the script that they're saying at the time that acknowledge certain myths have already happened. Now, this one, I'm not sure if they do specifically mention the airplane. I don't think they do.
I don't think they do. The only thing, they do a montage about making the cars remote controlled.
Yes.
But that would be done in post. That's all writing in VO.
Yes.
So that that doesn't mess with the timeline at all.
Yeah. I think I'm just going to be more careful next season looking for like if they mention specific things. Because I'm fascinated by this question of like what order were they shooting in?
How did this work?
How were they able to slip in references about a previous episode and how it was received? Or say things like, all right, the blow it up boys. Like, are you? Is that known at this point?
They're like runtime from shooting to air, because there's several of these. Again, we're now only about a year after the first pilots ran, and there's been 16, well, not including the pilots, there's been 13 episodes of the show that have come out. So that's really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, to make all of that and have it on the air. So I wonder, like, it could have been just a couple of months between shooting and airtime. So I would love to know more about that side of the behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, I'm really, really, really hoping that, like, there are so many people involved in the show that I want to talk to outside of the usual suspects.
Yeah.
For questions like this. Because, like, if you're talking to one of the cast members, that's one thing they can tell you about how shooting went. But I'm deeply interested in a lot of the production side stuff.
Me too.
In the editing, in how it came together, especially since they had to send it over to Australia and put it together a whole continent apart.
And speaking of that, we did get a little bit of that behind the scenes in this that we have never seen before.
Yes.
When the insurance company shuts down the shoot
Yes.
over the fears of the taxi, and we see an Australian producer talking to them about it, which we have talked about so much this season, that Mythbusters is an Australian show. And I think maybe once we heard a voice off camera, but this is the first time that we've actually heard the accent, seen someone acknowledged as a producer on the show. And the insurance company just says it's too dangerous. Apparently they were afraid of it harming the plane, not people.
Yes.
And of course, Adam makes the point, the worst that's going to happen is the taxi is going to go the opposite direction from the plane.
Nothing is going towards the jet stream, I don't think.
To be fair, they do then proceed to set the runway on fire about 5 minutes later in the show.
Well, cliff accidents happen.
The insurance company might have had a bit of a point.
They weren't exactly wrong. The funniest part to me is that, I don't know, but Adam does say that, like, we got a yes yesterday.
Yeah.
And now they're, like, reneging. And also, who, I'm sure there's a simple answer, like, there's insurance for productions and stuff like that, but it's very funny to me to imagine the type of man who is selling insurance and the Rubicon for him. Like, they're already telling him, we're going to send a car flying across a runway, and he's like, and what if it goes in the opposite direction? It's like, is that really the part of this where you, as the insurance guy, started getting a little nervous?
That goes to something I was thinking about, which was, from the sound of it, it sounded more to me, it sounded less like it was the production insurance and that it was the airport insurance. Or whoever is insuring the plane.
Yeah.
Because they were way more worried about the plane than they were the car, people in the way, whatever. So I wonder if it was actually that insurance company who had to sign off, because that's way outside the bounds of what you would typically do with a plane.
That's gotta be it.
Yeah.
Because it was one thing when you had like with the decompression, it was not a functional aircraft.
Right.
You definitely needed the engines to be working for this one to even be feasible. So, like, I think you may have nailed it. I think that has to be it, is that they had to use a functional airplane this time, and that's what set the insurance guy like, "Ooh, Nelly, I don't think so. Yeah. I don't think so on that one."
And really, I mean, they don't say it here in the episode, but this is really where the efficacy of their test kind of ends. So they have a solution, they have a plan B, which is awesome, but they get these jet engines that they say are used for making wind and effects in movies, and they're freaking cool. These giant jet engines mounted on trailers, towed behind trucks. They look so cool, but they're just not as powerful as real jet engines. Yeah. And so pretty much it's right here where it's like, well, we're kind of screwed. Like,
we're here, so we're gonna do it.
We're gonna make it happen one way or another. And it's still super satisfying to see each of the tests. They run it multiple times, and they keep blowing the car around. Like I said, at one point, they get the car so hot that it starts smoking, and they blew the fuel lines with the force of the jet engine. So there's gas going everywhere. It's crazy. It's an awesome sequence of tests.
Yeah.
And ultimately, but they just don't get a flip because they just can't do it. And this is where, as we said, they call it a Mythbusters failure. They just say, we couldn't get the materials we needed to actually make this happen.
Right.
But they do.
But wait.
Yeah, they actually have it's like a bit of a Cliff research trick that they employ on the show, where they show footage from the real event in Rio where this really happened.
Yes. So we do still get to see a car get flipped by a jet engine.
And what was interesting, when I was doing my research, I actually found this real story. At the same time, it was an article from January of 2002 that said that the taxi was driving along a street adjacent to the runway of Santos Dumont Airport when it was rolled several times before landing on its roof. Its 60-year-old driver was thrown from the car and suffered serious head injuries.
Oh.
So it was a bad accident, and it did in fact take place. And actually, weirdly enough, I found a very similar article from May 2015.
Okay.
Talking about the exact same thing, but I couldn't.
Where was that one?
Same place.
Wow,
weird. I couldn't figure out if it was it would. There wasn't a lot of detail in the second story, and I couldn't figure out if it was essentially a reprint of the same. All the dates on it were 2015.
Rerun. Yeah,
but I couldn't quite tell. So it's possible that this has actually happened again since then. But yeah, this one is certainly confirmed. It can and does happen, and unfortunately, we just don't get to see it in the episode.
Well, we kind of do.
We see the results of it.
Yeah.
We see the results of it for sure.
The insurance company has decided the stunt could damage the aircraft and pulled the plug.
The whole reason this is an issue is because we can't control, we don't know what the jet will do to the taxi.
That there's no way in hell that taxi is going to do anything but go farther away from the jet.
Myth 3, Daddy Longlegs. Are Daddy Longlegs the deadliest spiders in the world? So this is a story I feel like we all heard as kids.
Yeah.
The Daddy Longlegs are the most dangerous spiders. They have the most toxic venom, but their mouths are just too small and they can't bite humans.
Yes.
I definitely remember hearing this growing up. I remember telling this to people growing up. And I just need to say, at the very top of this myth, I do not like spiders.
Well, that makes two of us. However, there is a little caveat. The thing that we call, where we are, a granddaddy longleg, looks markedly different from what
That's a good point.
There is something about the ones we have here don't bother me as much. Like I can see them without I mean, I'm not diagnosed, but like I can't see a spider without going through some level of like, oh.
Yeah. Same.
There's a whole story associated with it. We'll get to there someday. But it's something about it just being a dot that's moving. Like where we are, it's just like a circle with legs. Yeah. Right? A little disc.
Really
almost.
Long, spindly legs. But
really,
the spider is
really long. There's no like separation of the thorax or anything like that. Right? So it doesn't look like a spider to me.
Yeah,
it just looks like a dot with legs, and that's kind of funny.
These mothers look like spiders.
These dudes are spiders, man.
Yeah.
These are spiders all the way. Arachne has kissed them. They are gross little boys. There is still something about the spindly legs that bothers me much less than I think some of it is also speed for me.
Yeah.
That like what sets me off is when I see them move. I'm just like, nothing should move like that.
It's wrong.
It's
wrong.
It's awful. And these guys kind of like, they cruise along. You know? They're taking their time. They'll get there when they get there. Who cares?
Well, for two people who hate spiders as much as we do, I know one place we should never go is apparently
Jamie's basement.
Jamie's house. Now, I will say, before we get to the spiderness of it all, I immediately pause the show to look around when they start cut to his house because we're in the Hyneman Lair. We have thought about this place. Where does Jamie live? This was a fascinating subject to me.
Yeah.
So I like paused it. I'm going when they're seeing these wider shots. I'm like pausing and looking around trying to see anything. It's just a bunch of junk.
It's just a basement.
I didn't see a single robot.
I didn't see a bat cave.
I didn't see a bat
that's
cave.
what I was expecting.
No giant pennies. Nothing.
Nothing. No dead Robin costumes.
I really expected it to be so much more intriguing. It turns out that it's just a pretty dirty spider-infested hellhole.
So that was another thing that immediately got me. Now, I don't know a ton about buying little critters, but I thought that they could purchase these from somewhere. I didn't expect a Pokemon style mission of go catch these yourself. And then also the fact that Jamie is like, I have just the place is just like, oh my God. But I feel like he did kind of hint that like he definitely doesn't kill them, but he might even like encourage it in a way.
Oh, yeah, I want to talk about this because he mentions that he likes spiders. He doesn't mind having them around and that he has had pet spiders. And he says that he once owned a spider as big as a dinner plate and they fed it mice.
No.
Now, Harrison, we don't swear on this show.
Okay.
But for the first time, I just want to say that. All right? 100% no from me, dog. As soon as he said that,
oh God,
my skin crept up and down my body and I was very unhappy.
I was too. I will say that immediately all of my defense mechanisms kicked in. Know your enemy. I know a lot about spiders.
Yeah, sure, me too.
Just because like they do fascinate me, even though I'm terrified of them.
And this goes to a fascinating place, by the way. I think that the where we get with the spiders is really interesting.
Super interesting.
This part though,
This part, Jamie's just trying to get to Adam. There's no spider that big.
But they say, I mean, whether there was ever one spider that big or not, they get 40 spiders from under Jamie's house.
That's exactly where I was going. That's the part that made my skin crawl. When they give us the count, when they show us all the Pokeballs at once, and I can see the volume of the things.
Yeah.
Also, I don't like spiders in such enclosures, like in such small settings.
It makes them feel bigger.
It not only makes them feel bigger, they just like negate gravity because they're like walking on the ceiling and like at the same time as they're on the ground, like their legs are just kind of everywhere and it's like splayed. I hate it. Is it worse to see them in a bunch of little containers trying to get to each other, or what comes later?
So I will say what backed me off the ledge on this myth was when they actually start going into the science of what we're going to do is test the venom, see if the fangs are long enough. And they go into this. It pulled it back for me that when we get to the tube sock from hell that Adam sticks his arm in later on, I was actually a little bit better at that point. To me, because if you know where the spiders are, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Seeing them in a basement and you was just like, oh, we're just reaching all around and we don't know where they are. That activates my everything.
Okay.
That I did not like.
Okay.
Yeah.
The tube sock from hell is also what Marilyn Manson calls the act. But
it's fair. It's for a future episode.
For future effort. Yeah, they'll test it eventually.
They do say something here that I immediately paused the show again and turned to my notes because I was like, I must take this down because they say they're going to bring in an expert spider milker.
Yes, that is the exact phrasing that is used.
And boy, does he deliver. He is arachnologist Chuck Christensen, and my dude is a Stephen King character brought to life. He is the
he really is.
best.
He really is.
And he's just very kind of this like rumpled, kind of angry looking dude who only lights up when he's talking about spiders.
He looks like Bruce Banner.
Yes.
Like Bruce Banner after he's just gotten out of a Hulk.
Yeah.
Like that's the image of this guy. Like slightly disheveled, but just you're so like dead-eyed until you bring up those little crawly boys.
And then he is the happiest man.
And then he's like, let me tell you.
I really want Chuck to go hang out and befriend Dr. Eel. I feel like we need a show of those two together because that's an adventure I would watch.
I would watch it and I would laugh a lot when it turns out that they have nothing in common because they just like they're both obsessed with a thing, but it's not the same thing. So just watching them try to be like, well, you know what's cool about eels? Do they have 8 legs?
No, they have no legs.
Then I'm not interested.
I did find this sequence fascinating to watch. They actually anesthetize. That's hard to say.
Stop.
They knock a spider out, clamp it in a microscope, and actually use electric shocks to coax the venom out. And Harrison is not enjoying this at all.
Dude, if I wasn't freaked out by Granddaddy Longlegs before, having to see it like through a microscope, and you can, because of course, you know, the arachnologist is like giddy about this. He's like, look, see, you can see the little tube that I'm putting in there. I'm like, oh my god, it's mouth.
Yeah, they make the tiny spider look huge.
What
is interesting, the result that they come to through their testing is that they find it's actually the reverse of the myth.
Yeah.
The fangs are long enough. They could actually bite someone, and they do.
Yes.
But it's just that their venom is nowhere near powerful enough. They said that a black widow's venom is much more powerful than a daddy longleg.
Yeah.
And that's still unfortunately a fairly
Is it
common.
daddy? Have I been saying granddaddy incorrectly this whole time?
I hear both.
Okay.
I've always heard
All
both.
right.
Daddy longlegs, granddaddy longlegs.
Hey, tweet at us if
Yeah. And so it was actually interesting that it's the reverse of what you've always heard.
Yes.
Is they can bite you. It just is not a big
it's
deal.
just their venom is,
if they do.
not only is it not the most venomous, it's not even particularly harmful.
Which we see, this is where the tube sock from hell comes in, where Adam is actually going to stick his arm in a tube of spiders to try to get bit. And I did love the way the narrator describes the importance of this test.
The idea is to encourage the spiders to bite. If Adam survives, it's the ultimate myth busted.
If Adam
That's
survives,
what we're testing for.
That's what we're
Will
testing
Adam
for.
die?
Yeah. Are we going to kill off one of the hosts?
This early in the show. It's a bold move, but that's how you make great television.
George R. R.
folks.
Martin's at home taking notes.
Just like, yes.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we should do.
I'm still not going to finish it, but it's a good myth. I just can't with this one. I just can't. I can't. There were so many parts of it where I just had to look away or be. You're having a man who is on record as loving spiders watch as the man who is on record as very much disliking them.
It's another one of those.
It's covered in.
It's another one of those great producing decisions, though.
It
it's
is.
way funnier to
It
watch
is.
Adam struggle when
It
he's,
is.
he does ultimately get bit, but says it's only a momentary burning sensation, and so the myth is busted because he's still alive.
Way to spoil it, Cliff.
Oh, sorry. Well, I did think that the storytelling here, much like we said before, was really good in that this could have been like the octopus egg myth, right? They could have gone to the same arachnologist and just had him go, no, here's what my research shows. They already knew when they started this where they were going to end up, right? They already knew what the result of this was going to be. This has been scientifically disproven long before Mythbusters got to it, but they broke it down into individual experiments, and it worked a lot better. It was a much better form of storytelling in that way. I thought so. Yeah, I was ooky as all get out, but I did think that as a myth, it was a pretty good exploration of it.
I'll agree with that.
That does it for us this week and for season one.
Season.
We will be back, though, as we mentioned, in January of 2025 with season 2. But in the meantime, we have some very special bonus episodes. Starting next week, we will be interviewing Dr. Heather Joseph Witham. So please come back. I cannot wait for folks to hear that. Can't wait to chat with her and learn a little bit more about the show from the inside. It's our first kind of exploration into that world, our first interview on the show. So we're very, very excited. We hope you guys will come back and listen next week and then in season 2.
Bye-bye, bubbies.
Try This at Home is produced by Slugline Media. The show was written, hosted, edited, and shot onto the internet by Cliff Baumgartner and Harrison Stewart. Our music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. You can follow the show on Instagram at TryThisPod or email us, trythisathomepod@gmail.com.